The first time I saw Don Valerio Rossi, he was a silhouette of violence backlit by the setting Neapolitan sun. He stood on the dock, the salt-laden wind tugging at his impeccably tailored coat, while two of his men threw a bound and weeping man into the churning dark water of the Bay of Naples. There was no splash, not really, just a gulp from the sea, a final desperate gasp swallowed by the wind, and then nothing. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I was supposed to be finishing my doctoral thesis on the linguistic patterns of coercion in southern Italian dialects. Instead, I was witnessing a perfect, real-world example of the ultimate coercion. My name is Dr. Alessia Marino, and for 6 months, I had been trying to get an audience with the most reclusive and powerful crime lord in Campania, not to study his criminal empire, but to beg for my father's life. My father, a small-time accountant with a gambling problem that was a cancer eating him from the inside out, had made the catastrophic error of trying to skim from the Rossis. He hadn't taken much, just enough to cover a debt he owed to another, lesser family. But betrayal was betrayal, and the price was always the same. I had exhausted every academic and political connection I had, called in every favor. Still, the message was always the same, delivered through a series of increasingly frightened intermediaries. Don Valerio does not grant audiences to the daughters of thieves. He settles his accounts personally, so I took the only option I had left. I used my research. I learned his patterns, the restaurants he favored, the nameless social clubs where he conducted his business. I learned the license plates of his fleet of black sedans, and I planted myself here, in this little cafe overlooking the private marina he used, a fortress of a villa carved into the cliffs above us. I had been coming here for 3 weeks, spending a small fortune on espresso and cornetto, becoming part of the scenery. The servers knew me as the quiet, studious woman with the stack of books. They didn't know my heart was a frantic bird beating itself against the cage of my ribs. And then today he came, not in a motorcade, but on foot. A small entourage of 3 men who moved with the lethal grace of panthers. And he had conducted his business, that chilling, efficient disposal of a problem, as if he were taking a casual stroll. My academic mind, the part of me that should have been horrified, was instead clinically fascinated. The body language was not of anger, but of absolute bored authority. This was not a crime of passion. It was administrative. As he turned from the water, his gaze, as dark and unforgiving as the deep water he'd just used as a grave, swept across the piazza. It was a predator's scan, missing nothing. It passed over the older men playing scopone, over the tourists sketching the Castel dell'Ovo, over the servers. And then it stopped on me. It was like being physically pinned. His eyes weren't just brown. They were the color of ancient obsidian, and they held a depth of calculation that made my breath catch. He knew I didn't belong. He knew I was watching. For a terrifying, exhilarating second, our eyes locked across the 100 meters of sun-washed cobblestones. I didn't look away. I couldn't. My father's life depended on this moment. I saw a flicker of something in his expression. Not curiosity, not yet, but a recognition of an anomaly. A variable he hadn't accounted for. He said something to the man on his left, a giant with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, who then turned his own cold gaze on me. Then, Don Valerio turned and walked away, his men falling into step around him, their forms disappearing into the labyrinth of narrow streets leading up to the Vomero district. The spell was broken. I let out a shuddering breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were trembling so violently that I had to clasp them together on the table. I had done it. I had gotten his attention. Now, I had to hope it was the kind of attention that led to a negotiation, and not a midnight visit from the man with the scar. I paid my bill, my movements automatic, my mind racing. I had to be prepared. He would have me investigated. He would know who I was by nightfall. The element of surprise was gone. All I had left was my wits and my knowledge. My phone buzzed in my bag. It was my mother. Her calls were a constant anxious refrain. "Alessia, any news? Have you heard anything?" Her voice was thin, stretched tight with a fear that had become her constant companion. "Not yet, Mama," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel into my voice. "But I'm making progress. I have a lead." It was a lie, but a necessary one. Telling her I had just stared down the man who held our fate in his hands would have sent her into a panic. He called again, "Alessia, the one your father owes. He said if we don't have the money by the end of the week, they won't just hurt your father. They'll come for us. For me." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. The Calabrians. They were less administrative than the Rossis. Their violence was personal, theatrical. I know, Mama, I know. I'm handling it. Stay home. Don't answer the door for anyone. I ended the call, leaning my head against the cool stone wall of the cafe. The weight of it all was crushing. 2 sets of wolves at the door, and my only weapon was a PhD. It felt absurd, laughable. I gathered my books and walked back to my tiny apartment in the Spanish Quarters. The streets a chaotic, vibrant symphony of life that felt completely alien to me. I was a ghost moving through it. My reality a narrow, desperate tunnel. My apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up, cramped and dim, but it had a small balcony overlooking a courtyard where laundry fluttered like faded flags. It was there, as I was unlocking my door, that I felt it. A presence. The air had changed. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned slowly. The man with the scar was standing at the end of the hallway, leaning against the stairwell banister. He wasn't looking at me. He was examining his fingernails with an air of profound boredom, but his posture was that of a coiled spring. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, so soon. I fumbled with the key, my hands slick with sweat, and finally got the door open. I slipped inside, locking it behind me, my back pressed against the wood as if that could keep him out. I waited, listening. I heard no footsteps, no knock. After 5 minutes of silence, I risked a glance through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Had I imagined it? No. The impression of him was too vivid, too menacing. It was a message, a reminder. We know where you live. I spent the evening in a state of heightened alert, jumping at every sound from the courtyard. I tried to work on my thesis, but the text on the screen blurred. All I could see was Don Valerio's face, the cold, detached power in his eyes. He wasn't a monster from a storybook. He was worse. He was a man who saw human lives as entries on a balance sheet. My father was a liability. I was an anomaly. Around midnight, as I was finally drifting into a fitful sleep, my phone buzzed again. Not a call, a text message, from an unknown number. It contained no words. Just an address and a time. Via San Biagio dei Librai, 14 noon, tomorrow. The blood drained from my face. Via San Biagio dei Librai was a narrow, crowded street in the heart of the historic center. A public place. A safe place, or a place where a person could disappear without a trace, swallowed by the crowds and the ancient stone. I didn't know, but I knew I had no choice. This was the audience I had begged for. I typed out a single-word reply, my finger hovering over the send button for a long moment before I pressed it. Va bene. Okay. The shop, Il Cartiglio, was nestled between a pasticceria and a shop selling grotesque, beautiful Presepe figurines. It looked ancient, its oak door warped with age and humidity, a brass bell hanging overhead. At precisely noon, my hand was slick on the cool, tarnished handle. I took a deep breath, the scent of sugar, espresso, and old wood filling my lungs, and pushed the door open. The bell jingled, a cheerful, mundane sound that was utterly dissonant with the thrumming terror in my veins. The interior was a cave of knowledge, smelling of aged paper, leather, and dust. Floor-to-ceiling shelves were crammed with books, their spines cracked and faded. A single green-shaded lamp cast a pool of warm light on a massive, scarred wooden desk piled high with manuscripts and maps. And behind that desk sat Don Valerio Rossi. He wasn't looking at me. He was studying a large, yellowed folio, his long, elegant fingers tracing the lines of what looked like a nautical chart. He wore a simple, dark sweater, no suit jacket, no visible armor of any kind. He looked younger like this, more like a scholar or a collector, the sharp, predatory lines of his face softened by the lamplight. It was a carefully constructed illusion, and I wasn't fooled for a second. The man with the scar, who I now knew was his capo, Luca, stood by a bookshelf near the back, ostensibly examining a set of Dante's Divine Comedy. His presence was a cold anchor in the room, a reminder of the reality outside this quiet bubble. I stood there, just inside the door, unsure of what to do. Announce myself? Curtsy? My academic training had not covered the protocol for meeting a crime lord in an antique bookshop. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, Valerio spoke without looking up. Dr. Marino. His voice was exactly as I remembered it from my imagination, a low baritone, smooth as aged whiskey, with the faintest rasp of Naples in its depths. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He knew exactly who I was. You are punctual. A rare and admirable quality. He finally lifted his gaze from the folio, and those obsidian eyes pinned me to the spot. The intensity was undiminished by the cozy setting. If anything, it was heightened. Here, in this intimate space, his presence was overwhelming. "Thank you for seeing me, Don Valerio," I said, my voice thankfully steady, betraying none of the earthquake happening inside me. I took a few steps forward, stopping at a respectful distance from the desk. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. He gestured to the heavy leather chair opposite him. "Sit." It was not a request. I sat, perched on the edge of the chair, my back straight, my hands clasped in my lap to hide their trembling. I was in the lion's den. Now I had to convince the lion not to eat me. He closed the folio with a soft thud and leaned back, steepling his fingers. He studied me with a disconcerting analytical focus. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, every flaw, every fear laid bare. "You have been a very persistent ghost, Dr. Marino, haunting my cafes, my roots. You cost me 2 good men I had to reassign to determine if you were a threat." My breath hitched. I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't," he said, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his dark eyes. "A threat would have been more careful, or more competent. You, however, are merely desperate." The word landed like a slap. It was true, but hearing him say it, with that cool, clinical detachment, was humiliating. "My father—" He held up a hand, silencing me. The gesture was absolute. "Your father, Enzo Marino, is a thief. He stole 30,000 euros from me. He did it clumsily, thinking no one would notice such a small amount. He was wrong. The amount is irrelevant. The principle is everything. He was desperate too," I whispered, the fight leaching out of me. "He owes the Calabrians. They threatened my mother." Valerio's expression did not change. "The Calabrians are animals, but that is not my concern. Your father's poor judgment in his choice of creditors does not absolve him of his crime against me." "I know," I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. This was it. My only chance. "I am not here to ask you to absolve him. I am here to propose a transaction." One dark eyebrow arched infinitesimally. "A transaction. You have something I want. My father's life, his safety from your organization. And I have something you might find valuable." A faint, cynical smile touched his lips. "I am a wealthy man, Dr. Marino. What could a PhD student drowning in her father's debts possibly offer me?" I took a deep breath. This was the gamble. My research wasn't just about dialects. It was about power structures, communication, and the vulnerabilities within them. "Information," I said. "Analysis. You run a vast organization. It's a complex ecosystem of loyalties, rivalries, and communication. My doctoral work is on the linguistics of coercion and loyalty in southern Italian syndicates. I can analyze patterns in intercepted communications, identify potential betrayals based on linguistic shifts, and profile your allies and your enemies through their speech patterns and word choices. I can tell you who is loyal, who is fearful, and who is planning to stab you in the back." The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Luca had stopped pretending to read Dante and was watching me, his expression unreadable. Valerio had gone perfectly still. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of my audacity. I had just offered a Mafia don my services as a corporate psychologist for his criminal empire. He leaned forward slowly, the leather of his chair creaking. The lamplight carved shadows under his cheekbones, making him look both more severe and more compelling. "You are suggesting I employ you as a consultant?" "Yes. You believe you can look at my organization, my world, and from the safety of your university library, understand its inner workings well enough to predict its fractures." "Not from the library," I said, my throat dry. "I would need access to certain non-sensitive communications, to sit in on lower-level meetings, to observe." His smile was slow and dangerous. "You are either courageous, Dr. Marino, or foolish. My world eats brave, stupid girls for breakfast." "I am neither," I said, a spark of defiance igniting within me. "I am a scientist, and you have a problem with organizational integrity. I am offering you a tool to solve it. And in return, you forgive my father's debt. You make the problem with the Calabrians disappear, and you guarantee my family's safety. Permanently." He was silent for a long time, his gaze boring into me, weighing my soul. I held my breath, my entire future balanced on the edge of his decision. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but absolute. No! The single word felt like a physical blow. It sucked the air from my lungs. All my planning, my desperation, my hope, shattered. I felt the hot sting of tears behind my eyes and fought them back furiously. I would not cry in front of this man. I started to rise, my legs weak. I see. Then I apologize for wasting your time. Sit down, Dr. Marino. The command was like a whip crack. I froze halfway out of my chair and slowly sank back down. I do not make deals with amateurs, he said, his voice cold. And I do not grant clemency based on theoretical promises. You ask me to trust your science, but trust is earned. You want to save your father? Prove your value. How? I asked, my voice a ragged whisper. He picked up a pen from his desk, a heavy silver fountain pen, and began to turn it over in his fingers. I will give you a test, a single, non-sensitive, intercepted message. You will analyze it. You will tell me everything you can deduce about the author, his intentions, and his loyalties. If your analysis is correct and, more importantly, useful, we will discuss your proposal further. If you are wrong, he let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken consequence more terrifying than any specific threat. And my father? The Calabrians have given us until the end of the week. Your father's situation remains unchanged, he said flatly. Consider this an incentive for you to be both brilliant and swift. It wasn't kind. It was a deliberate application of pressure, a way to ensure I was operating from a place of pure desperation. And it was working. I had no choice. I had to play his game. I accept, I said. He gave a curt nod and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a printout of a text message conversation, in Italian. The names were redacted, replaced with initials. You have 24 hours, Don Valerio said. Luca will see you out. I took the paper, my fingers trembling. I didn't look at it. I stood, my legs only slightly unsteady, and turned to leave. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me again. Dr. Marino. I glanced back. He was watching me, the pen still in his hand, his expression unreadable. Do not disappoint me. Luca opened the door for me, his scarred face impassive. I stepped out into the bright, noisy chaos of the Spaccanapoli, the sheet of paper clutched in my hand like a lifeline. The bright Neapolitan sun was a shocking contrast to the dim, silent intensity of the bookshop. I felt like I had been underwater for a long time and had just broken the surface, gasping for air. I found a small, secluded bench in a nearby piazza, my mind reeling. I had done it. I had gotten my foot in the door, but the price of failure was now unimaginably high. I looked down at the paper in my hands, the first and only test between my father and his grave. I unfolded it and began to read. The messages were brief, seemingly innocuous. A discussion about a shipment of ceramics from a factory in Caserta. But as my trained eyes scanned the words, the patterns began to emerge. The use of the formal lei, where two would be expected between colleagues. The specific, almost archaic slang used for money. The unusual repetition of a particular phrase, a verbal tic that suggested anxiety. This was no simple business memo. This was a coded conversation, and my PhD, the very thing that had felt so useless in the face of brute violence, was suddenly the most powerful weapon I had. I took a deep breath, the academic in me taking over, pushing the fear aside. I had 24 hours to prove to a Mafia don that I was valuable enough to let live. I started to work. The words on the page blurred and sharpened as my focus intensified. The world around me. The shrieking laughter of children chasing pigeons. The distant wail of a Vespa. The rich smell of baking pizza faded into a dull hum. My entire existence narrowed to the sequence of characters, the spaces between them, the rhythm and cadence of a conversation that was meant to sound mundane. My initial read was correct. This was a code, but not a complex substitution cipher. It was more sophisticated. It was linguistic camouflage, using the natural flow of Neapolitan dialect to hide its true intent. The first message from C read, Z, the shipment of those ceramics from the Caserta factory is delayed. The master says the clay isn't right. They need another week to fire the new batch. On the surface, it was a simple business update. But the word Z, a contraction of zio, or uncle, was interesting. It was a term of respect, even endearment, but in this context, it felt performative, a deliberate signal of subservience. The second message from G was the reply, A week is too long. The buyers for these particular pieces are impatient men. Tell the master to use the old clay. We've sold pieces from it before without complaint. This was the key. The old clay. My mind, trained to find patterns in linguistic stress and semantic fields, latched onto it. Why specify old clay when discussing a delay caused by bad clay? It was a non sequitur, unless clay wasn't clay at all. I pulled out my laptop and connected to the shaky public Wi-Fi. I cross-referenced the phrase vecchia argilla, old clay, against my database of regional idioms and known criminal jargon. Nothing direct came up, but then I thought about the context. A shipment, buyers, impatience. I tried a different tack, searching for slang related to narcotics. Cocaine was often called polvere or powder, but sometimes, in older slang, it was referred to as bianca or white. Clay didn't fit. Then it hit me. Not narcotics, weapons, guns. The clay could refer to either the material itself or its base components. The old clay could be a specific, perhaps inferior source for firearms. Or, given the Rossi family's known grip on port operations and shipping, it could be something else entirely. Counterfeit goods? Stolen antiquities? I leaned back, closing my eyes, letting the syntax wash over me. The master. The buyers? The clay? It was a supply chain problem. But the language used by G was aggressive, dismissive of the master's concerns. Tell the master to use the old clay. That wasn't a suggestion. It was an order disguised as one. The power dynamic was wrong. C was reporting a problem from a position of relaying information. Gian was commanding a solution from a position of authority. But the use of Z from C suggested he was the subordinate. The pieces didn't fit the stated hierarchy. I opened my eyes and looked at the messages again, this time ignoring the literal meaning and focusing solely on the psychological subtext. The anxiety in C's message was palpable in the repetition of "isn't right" and the specific time frame of "another week." He was nervous. G's response was impatient, cutting, and involved a deliberate decision to compromise on quality for speed. He was risking the product and, by extension, the reputation of the business to appease these impatient buyers. Why? My thesis had a whole chapter on loyalty signals in high-stakes environments. One of the key indicators of a potential betrayer was a sudden shift in priority away from the group's long-term stability and toward a short-term personal gain. Gunnar was prioritizing the immediate satisfaction of these new buyers over the master's quality control. This wasn't just a business dispute. It smelled of a side deal, a shadow operation using the Rossi infrastructure. I spent hours building a profile. C was likely a mid-level operative, fearful, caught between a superior he respected, the master, and a commanding figure, G, who was pushing him into a risky venture. G's was arrogant, ambitious, and financially motivated. He was cutting corners, and his imperative tone suggested he believed he was untouchable, or that his new buyers were powerful enough to shield him. The impatient men were the key. They were the external variable, the catalyst for this betrayal. Who were they? Rivals? The Calabrians? An outside cartel? The message didn't say, but the mere existence of this pressure, and G's reaction to it, was the vulnerability. I compiled my findings, typing up a concise clinical report. I avoided emotional language or wild speculation. I stuck to the data, the anomalous use of Z, the semantic inconsistency of old clay, the skewed power dynamic, and the psychological profile of both parties that pointed to an internal faction operating outside established protocols for personal profit. I concluded that G was likely diverting resources or running an unauthorized operation, and that his new associates potentially compromised his allegiance. As I typed the final period, the sun was dipping below the roofline of the piazza, casting long, deep shadows. The 24 hours were almost up. I had no way to contact Don Valerio. I assumed Luca would find me. The thought was unsettling. I sent the document to my cloud drive and closed my laptop, my body aching with a fatigue that was more mental than physical. I had done all I could. Now I had to wait. I bought a panino from a nearby bar and ate it without tasting it, my senses on high alert, scanning every face in the dwindling crowd. Every time a large man walked by, my heart skipped a beat. It was fully dark when I decided to return to my apartment. The narrow streets of the Spanish quarters were even more chaotic at night, filled with the energy of 1,000 different lives. I felt a profound sense of isolation, adrift in this sea of humanity. I was unlocking my door when a black sedan, sleek and silent, pulled up to the curb. My blood ran cold. The passenger window slid down. It was Luca. He didn't speak, just jerked his head toward the back seat. The message was clear. Get in. This was it. The judgment. I clutched my laptop bag to my chest like a shield and walked to the car, my legs feeling like they were made of wood. I slid into the back seat. The interior was cool, with a scent of leather and expensive cologne. Don Valerio was not inside. It was just Luca and a driver I didn't recognize. The doors locked with a soft, definitive thud. Luca didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead as the car pulled smoothly into the traffic. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice small in the luxurious silence. "You'll see," Luca said, his voice a low rumble. We didn't drive to the bookshop or the villa in Vomero. Instead, we wound our way through the city, heading toward the industrial port area. The cheerful lights of the city center gave way to the harsh, orange glow of sodium vapor lamps, illuminating warehouses, shipping containers stacked like giant rust-colored Lego bricks, and the hulking shadows of cranes against the night sky. The car stopped beside a nondescript warehouse. Its corrugated metal door rolled down. Luca got out and opened my door. "Out!" I obeyed, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was not the setting for a congratulatory meeting. This felt like the prelude to an execution. My father's face flashed in my mind. Had I been wrong? Had my analysis failed and this was the consequence? Luca led me to a small reinforced door set into the side of the warehouse. He knocked twice, paused, then knocked once more. A code. The door buzzed and opened inward. The space inside was vast and mostly empty, save for a few crates stacked against a far wall. In the center of the concrete floor, under a single bare-hanging bulb, stood Don Valerio, and kneeling before him, his hands bound behind his back, was a man I recognized from my frantic research into the Rossi organization. Giancuso. G. His face was bruised and bloody, one eye swollen shut. He was breathing in ragged, wet gasps. Valerio stood over him, his posture relaxed, his hands in the pockets of his trousers. He looked as calm as if he were waiting for a bus. He glanced up as we entered, his obsidian gaze flicking from Luca to me. "Dr. Marino," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Your report was insightful." He gestured to the broken man at his feet. "As you deduced, Giancuso here was using my shipping lanes to move counterfeit pharmaceuticals from a contact in Bulgaria, the old Clay. He was cutting the agreed-upon product with fillers to increase his personal profit, selling to a new, eager clientele in Marseille, the impatient men. My analysis had been correct. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so potent my knees felt weak. I had passed the test. Valerio began to circle Giancuso slowly. He believed his operation was small enough to go unnoticed. He believed his position made him untouchable. He was wrong on both counts. He stopped behind Giancuso and looked directly at me. "You identified the linguistic stress markers, the power imbalance, the semantic dissonance. You saw the crack in the foundation from a single sheet of paper. Tell me, doctor, what is the appropriate response to a betrayal of this nature?" He was testing me again, a deeper, more brutal test. He was asking me to pronounce a sentence, to participate. I looked at Giancuso, at the sheer animal terror in his one good eye. This was no longer an academic exercise. This was real. A man's life was hanging in the balance, and Don Valerio was placing the scales in my hands. My mouth went dry. I thought of my father. I thought of the man thrown into the bay. This was the world I was asking to enter. This was the price of my family's safety. I met Valerio's unwavering gaze, my own voice surprisingly steady when I spoke. "The response must be absolute," I said, the words tasting like ash. "To do otherwise invites further infection." A slow, approving smile touched Valerio's lips. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. He gave an almost imperceptible nod to Luca. "You have potential, Dr. Marino," he said softly, as Luca stepped forward. "We will discuss your proposal. Wait in the car." I didn't look back. I turned and walked out of the warehouse, the sound of my footsteps on the concrete the only thing in my ears. I didn't look back as I heard the warehouse door shut behind me, closing off whatever was about to happen. I got into the car, my body numb. I had passed the test. I had secured the deal, and in doing so, I had just condemned a man to his fate. I had become a part of the machine. The driver didn't speak. I sat in the silent, perfumed darkness, staring at my reflection in the tinted window, wondering what, exactly, I had just become. Unlike the cozy chaos of Il Cartillo. This was a statement of power. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of books, all meticulously organized. A large, modern desk made of dark wood stood near a window that looked out over a manicured garden, the city lights of Naples twinkling far below. On the desk sat a new computer, a stack of notebooks, and a secure, encrypted communication device. "This is where you will work," Valerio said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, quiet room. "The system on the computer is isolated. You can access the files I provide. You cannot send or receive external communications from it. Your personal phone and laptop will be scanned and monitored. This is for your safety as much as for my security." He walked over to the desk and picked up a single file folder. "Your first official assignment. A series of conversations between 3 captains overseeing our operations in the Amalfi Coast. I want to know if the recent pressure from the Camorra and Salerno is causing any ideological shifts." He held out the folder. I took it, my fingers brushing against his. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot up my arm. My eyes flew to his. For a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker in those dark depths. Not calculation, not cold assessment, but a spark of pure, undiluted awareness. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his customary impenetrable mask. But I had seen it. He felt it too. This dangerous electric current that arced between us. He took a slow step closer, and the air in the room seemed to thin, becoming difficult to breathe. He was close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, close enough to smell the clean, sharp scent of his skin. He reached out, and, with a surprising gentleness, tucked a stray strand of my hair behind my ear. His fingertips grazed my cheek, and it was like a brand. "Do not mistake this for kindness, Alessia," he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. "You are a valuable asset. I protect my assets, but you are also in my world now. My rules, my command." His gaze dropped to my lips for a heartbeat before returning to my eyes. "The man you were in the piazza, the desperate girl with the books, is gone. She would not have survived the night. The woman who stood in the warehouse and gave a correct, if ruthless, assessment. She is the one I am investing in. Do not make me regret my investment." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the center of the magnificent library, the file folder clutched in my trembling hands, the phantom touch of his fingers still burning on my skin. I was safe. My family was safe. I had gotten everything I asked for. So why did I feel like I had just jumped from a frying pan into the very heart of the fire? I walked to the window and looked down at the city. My old life was down there, in those tiny illuminated streets. A life of academic debates, cheap wine, and worrying about student loans. It felt a million miles away. I was up here, in the dragon's lair, and the dragon had just shown me that he found me. Interesting. I looked at the file in my hands. It was my leash and my lifeline. I sat down at the expensive desk in the silent, gilded cage and I opened the file. I had work to do. The first week in the villa was a study in surreal isolation. I existed in a bubble of quiet luxury and intense mental focus. My world shrank to the 4 walls of the library, the glow of the computer screen, and the stack of files that Luca delivered each morning. They were transcripts, audio files, and surveillance reports, a river of whispered secrets and coded language that I had to decipher. The work itself was intellectually exhilarating, a brutal, high-stakes application of everything I had spent years studying. I was no longer dealing with historical case studies or theoretical models. I was analyzing the beating heart of a live criminal organization, and the patterns I found were both fascinating and terrifying. I identified a captain in Positano, whose language showed signs of increasing paranoia, his sentences becoming more fragmented, his threats more erratic. I noted a lieutenant in Sorrento who had suddenly started using Sicilian slang, a possible indicator of unauthorized contact with a rival syndicate. I wrote my reports with clinical precision, laying out my evidence, citing linguistic markers, and offering probabilities rather than certainties. Valerio was a ghost in the villa. I sometimes heard his footsteps in the hallway, the low murmur of his voice in another room, but he did not disturb me. My reports were sent to him electronically through the isolated system, and I received no feedback. It was like shouting into a void. The only human interaction I had was with the silent elderly butler who brought my meals, and with Luca, who was my warden. He was a man of few words, his presence a constant grim reminder of the reality of my situation. I tried to engage him once, asking about a particular phrase I'd found in a transcript. He just looked at me with his flat, cold eyes and said, "I break bones, Dottoressa. I don't parse words." It was a stark delineation of our roles. I was the brain. He was the fist. My only link to my old life was my personal phone, which I was allowed to keep, though I had no doubt it was monitored. I called my mother every day. The change in her was miraculous. The constant wire-taut anxiety in her voice was gone, replaced by a cautious relief. "Alessia, it's incredible," she said one evening, her voice bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Your father, he's a new man. That investment in the limoncello company, the one he always said was a fool's errand, it's suddenly taken off. A distributor from Milan came and offered a huge contract. And the men who used to call, they've stopped. It's like a nightmare has ended." I closed my eyes, leaning back in the expensive leather chair. "I'm glad, Mama. I'm so glad. This grant of yours, it's a miracle. You must be working so hard. Are you eating? Are you sleeping?" "I'm fine, Mama," I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "The research is demanding, but it's exactly what I wanted." I was protecting them by lying and creating a false narrative of a normal life. But with each lie, I felt myself drifting further away from the person I used to be. The woman who valued truth above all else was constructing a fortress of falsehoods. It was on the 8th night that everything shifted again. I was working late, chasing a subtle linguistic thread in a series of text messages between two boat captains. The use of the word delfino, dolphin, was inconsistent. Sometimes it seemed to refer to a person, sometimes to a type of cargo. I was so deep in concentration that I didn't hear the library door open. "You are still working." Valerio's voice close behind me made me jump. I spun the chair around. He was standing there, having shed his suit jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the corded muscles of his forearms. He held 2 glasses of a deep ruby-red wine. He looked less like a don and more like a tired, powerful businessman at the end of a long day. The transformation was disarming. "The Delfino reference," I said, my heart still thumping from the surprise. "It's ambiguous. I'm trying to isolate the contextual rules for its usage." He handed me a glass. "It's a person. A young, fast swimmer who brings small, high-value packages from the larger ships to the shore. The inconsistency is deliberate. It keeps the authorities guessing. Of course. It was so obvious now that he said it. I felt a flush of professional embarrassment. I should have deduced that. "You lack the context," he said, leaning against the edge of the desk, his proximity sending a fresh wave of awareness through me. He smelled of wine, of the night air, and of something uniquely him. "Linguistics can only take you so far. You need to understand the mechanics of the world you are analyzing." He took a sip of his wine, his eyes watching me over the rim of the glass. "Your report on the Amalfi captains was accurate. The one in Positano was becoming a liability. He was dealt with." The words "dealt with" hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken violence. Another man, another consequence drawn from my analysis. I took a large swallow of the wine. It was rich and complex, tasting of dark cherries and oak. "A very expensive vintage? And the lieutenant using Sicilian slang?" I asked, needing to steer the conversation back to the clinical. "A mistress. From Palermo. A personal indiscretion, not a professional one. For now." He swirled the wine in his glass. "You see? Context." We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft ticking of the grand clock in the corner. The tension between us was a living thing, a thick, humming wire connecting us across the few feet of Persian rug. "Why did you really bring me here, Don Valerio?" The question left my lips before I could stop it. He looked at me, his dark eyes unreadable. "Valerio," he said softly, "when we are in this room, you may call me Valerio." That was not an answer. It was a concession, an intimacy. It was far more dangerous. "You could have had me do this work from my apartment. You could have remained at a distance, but you brought me into your home. Why?" He set his glass down on the desk with a soft click. He moved with that predator's grace, coming to stand in front of my chair. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a physical force. "Because I wanted to see," he murmured, his gaze tracing the lines of my face, my throat, as if memorizing them. The woman with the nerve to stare me down in a piazza, the mind sharp enough to dissect my organization from a text message. I wanted to see if she had a spine to match. Or if she would break in the silence, in the isolation, under the weight of what she was doing. His eyes met mine, and the intensity there was scorching. "You have not broken, Alessia. You have thrived. That is intriguing." My breath caught. The air was so thick I could barely draw it into my lungs. Every instinct, every shred of self-preservation screamed at me to look away, to retreat. But I couldn't. I was mesmerized. "And what happens when you are no longer intrigued?" I whispered. A slow, dark smile touched his lips. "Then, Kara, you had better hope your debt is paid." He reached out then, not to touch my face, but to pick up a pen from my desk. His fingers brushed against mine, and the same electric jolt from the first night arced between us, hotter and more potent this time. He straightened up, the moment breaking. "Finish your wine. Get some sleep. The Delfino can wait until morning." He turned and walked out of the library, leaving me alone with the ghost of his touch, and the terrifying realization that the most dangerous threat in this gilded cage wasn't the violence or the crime. It was the man himself, and the traitorous part of me that was increasingly, desperately drawn to him. I finished the wine in one long, unsteady gulp. The Delfino was forgotten. All I could think about was the look in his eyes when he called me intriguing. It was a label more perilous than any enemy. I was in far deeper trouble than I had ever imagined. The days began to develop a new, more dangerous rhythm. The work remained the same, a constant stream of analysis that sharpened my mind to a razor's edge. But now, Valerio's evening visits became a ritual. He would appear in the library, often with a bottle of wine or a glass of Amaro, and he would debrief me. It was no longer a one-way stream of information. He would question my conclusions, challenge my assumptions, and provide the brutal, real-world context that my analysis lacked. He was, in his own terrifying way, mentoring me. He taught me about the delicate balance of fear and respect that held his world together. He explained the subtle differences between the Camorra's chaotic ambition and the Ndrangheta's silent, blood-deep loyalties. He discussed the politics of the port, noting how a delayed shipping container could be either a deliberate insult or a prelude to war. I listened, absorbing it all, my academic understanding of organized crime being ruthlessly overwritten by the lived experience of the man who commanded it. And through it all, the current between us grew stronger, a constant, low-voltage hum that made the air in the library crackle. We circled each other, two predators from different species, fascinated and wary. I learned to read the subtle shifts in his impassive face, the slight tightening around his eyes when he was displeased, the almost imperceptible relaxation of his jaw when he was impressed. He in turn seemed to be learning from me. He knew when I was stuck on a problem, when I needed silence, and when I needed him to provide the missing piece of context that would make everything click into place. It was during one of these sessions, about 2 weeks after his first evening visit, that I stumbled. I was analyzing a series of phone calls from a captain in Forcella, a dense, ancient neighborhood in the heart of Naples. The man's language was a masterclass in evasion and double meaning. I had been at it for hours and my focus was fraying. Valerio was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out at the city. I was trying to explain a particularly convoluted metaphor involving a rotten fish and a wedding, my frustration mounting. "It doesn't make sense," I said, pushing my hair back from my forehead. "The semantic field is all wrong. He's talking about a celebration, but using the lexicon of decay and poison. It's cognitively dissonant." Valerio didn't turn. He's telling his contact that the deal is off. The product is contaminated, and the partnership is poisoned. The wedding was the proposed merger. The fish is the product. He's being poetic. The simplicity of his explanation, after hours of my mental gymnastics, was the final straw. A wave of exhaustion and futility washed over me. I was an outsider playing a game with rules I could only half understand. In a moment of pure, unthinking frustration, I cursed under my breath, but I didn't curse in Italian. The words that slipped out were in the old, guttural Sicilian dialect my nonna had spoken when I was a child, words she'd used when she was angry at the world, sharp and ancient and foul. The room went utterly still. The air itself seemed to freeze. Valerio turned from the window with a slow, deliberate motion that was more threatening than any sudden movement could ever be. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were burning with a dark, intense fire I had never seen before. He crossed the room in a few silent strides, stopping directly in front of my chair. He loomed over me, his presence blocking out the light, filling my entire world. The scent of him, clean and sharp, invaded my senses. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird caught in a trap. I had overstepped. I had been disrespectful. I had shown a side of myself I kept hidden, and in his world, any vulnerability was a weakness to be exploited. I braced myself for his anger, for the cold dismissal, for the reminder of my place. But it didn't come. Instead, he leaned down, placing his hands on the arms of my chair, caging me in. His face was inches from mine. His gaze was locked on my lips. "Say that again," he commanded, his voice a low, rough whisper that vibrated through my entire body. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. Slowly. The request was so unexpected, so intimate, it stole the air from my lungs. This wasn't about reprimand. This was about something else entirely. The tension between us, the humming wire that had been stretching tighter for weeks, suddenly snapped. The air was thick with a dangerous, intoxicating heat. I could feel the warmth of his skin, see the dark flecks in his obsidian eyes. My mind went blank. All my training, all my fear, wiped away by the sheer magnetic force of him. My lips parted. I could barely breathe, let alone speak. But I did. I repeated the curse, the old, ugly Sicilian words. But this time I said them slowly, deliberately, my voice a husky whisper, each syllable a deliberate caress in the charged space between us. I saw his eyes darken, the pupils swallowing the irises. A muscle ticked in his jaw. The controlled mask he always wore shattered, and for the first time I saw the raw, untamed man beneath, a man of passion and fire and ruthless desire. He didn't move for a long moment, just held my gaze, letting the ancient words hang in the air, letting the meaning of this shift settle over us both. The pretense of employer and employee, of captor and captive, evaporated. This was something primal, something inevitable. "Do you have any idea?" he murmured, his voice gravelly with a restraint that was clearly costing him. "What it does to a man like me to hear a beautiful, intelligent woman curse in the tongue of his ancestors?" He brought one hand up, his fingers hovering just beside my cheek, not touching, but I could feel the heat of his skin. "It is the most provocative thing I have ever heard." Then, he closed the final, infinitesimal distance. His lips met mine. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claim, a conquest. It was heat and pressure, and a desperate, hungry need that mirrored the one suddenly roaring to life inside me. It was the taste of expensive wine and dark secrets and pure, undiluted power. Every warning bell in my head was silenced by the sheer rightness of it, by the feeling of a lock finally turning after a lifetime of being the wrong key. My hands came up, not to push him away, but to clutch at the front of his shirt, holding on as the world tilted on its axis. He deepened the kiss, one hand tangling in my hair, the other moving to my waist, pulling me from the chair and against the solid, unyielding wall of his body. I was lost. I was found. I was in more danger than I had ever been, and I never, ever wanted it to end. When he finally broke the kiss, we were both breathing raggedly. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his body tense against me. "Alessia," he breathed, my name a prayer and a curse on his lips. It was the only word either of us could manage. The world outside this room, the world of debts and murders and moral compromises, no longer existed. There was only this. There was only him. The world snapped back into focus with the sound of the library door clicking shut. He was gone. The air still vibrated with the echo of his presence. The ghost of his touch seared into my lips. I stood there, alone in the vast, silent room, my fingers pressed to my mouth. I could still taste him, dark, rich, and dangerous. My heart was a wild, frantic thing trying to beat its way out of my chest. What had I done? I had crossed a line from which there was no coming back. I had kissed the devil, and a part of me had reveled in it. The clinical part of my brain, the one that had been trained to analyze and deconstruct, was screaming in alarm. This was a catastrophic miscalculation. I had blurred the lines of a professional relationship that was already skewed by a massive power imbalance. I had allowed my personal, traitorous attraction to override every shred of self-preservation. He was a man who ordered executions. I was a woman he owned. This couldn't end well. But the rest of me, the part that had felt so alive and seen in his arms, was singing. That kiss had not been about power or domination, not entirely. It had been about recognition. It was as if he had seen past the desperate daughter, the useful academic, and had kissed the raw, real woman underneath. The one who was tired of being good. The one who was fascinated by the dark. The one who could curse in Sicilian when pushed to her limit. I stumbled to the window, kneading the cool glass against my forehead. The city lights below were a blur. My life had just fractured into a before and after. Before the kiss, I was his prisoner, his asset. After the kiss, what was I? His lover? His mistress? Another possession, just a more intimate one? The thought should have filled me with dread. Instead, a treacherous thrill shot through me. I didn't see him the next day. Luca brought my files in the morning, his expression as unreadable as ever. He did not indicate that he knew his boss had pinned me to a chair and kissed me senseless the night before. The work was my only anchor. I threw myself into it, using the complex patterns of deceit and loyalty as a lifeline to keep my own swirling emotions at bay. I analyzed a proposed deal with a Russian consortium, identifying linguistic markers of deception in their counter-proposals. I profiled a new city councilman, finding subtle signs of an existing allegiance to a rival family. The work was sharp, clean, and logical. It was a sanctuary from the chaotic, illogical storm that had broken inside me. But my concentration was a fragile thing. Every sound in the hallway made my heart leap. Every time the door opened, I expected it to be him. But it was only the butler with lunch or Luca with more files. The absence was a presence in itself. It felt deliberate. A punishment? A test? Or was he, too, grappling with the consequences of what we had done? The uncertainty was a special kind of torture. That evening, I couldn't focus. The words on the screen swam before my eyes. I paced the library, my skin feeling too tight, my nerves stretched thin. I was like an addict waiting for a fix, and the drug was the dangerous, captivating presence of Valerio Rossi. Finally, as the clock chimed 10, the door opened. He stood there, framed in the doorway. He was dressed much as he had been the night before, but his expression was different. The raw hunger was gone, replaced by a watchful, intense stillness. He held 2 glasses, but this time it was amber liquid, not wine. Whiskey. He closed the door behind him and walked toward me, his steps silent on the rug. He held out a glass. I took it, our fingers brushing. The contact was electric, a stark reminder of the line we had crossed. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice low. "Your report on the Russians was thorough. You saved me from a very costly mistake." It was praise, but it felt like a probe. He was assessing the damage. "It's my job," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. I took a sip of the whiskey. It was smooth and smoky, burning a path of warmth down my throat. "Is it?" He moved to his usual spot, leaning against the desk, but he didn't sit. He stood, watching me, dominating the space without even trying. After last night, I was not sure what our professional dynamic would be, so he was addressing it directly. Of course he was. He was a man who confronted problems head-on. It was one of the things that made him so effective and so terrifying. "I'm not sure either," I admitted, deciding that honesty was my only viable currency now. "I'm not in the habit of kissing my employees." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And I am not in the habit of wanting to kiss them." The admission, so blunt and unexpected, stole my breath. He took a step closer. "It complicates things." "You told me nothing in your world is simple," I countered, holding my ground. "You thrive on complexity." "I do," he agreed, his gaze intense. "But this is a complexity I did not anticipate. You are a variable I did not account for, Alessia, from the very beginning." He reached out and took the whiskey glass from my hand, setting both of our glasses on the desk. Then he took my hands in his. His palms were warm, his grip firm but not painful. The gesture was astonishingly intimate. "I brought you here because you were useful. I kept you here because you were fascinating. But last night," he shook his head, a rare show of genuine, uncalculated emotion. Last night, you became a necessity. The word landed in the center of my chest, a detonation of feeling. A necessity. It was more powerful than valuable, more profound than desired. It was a confession of dependency from a man who depended on no one. I don't know what that means, I whispered, my heart in my throat. It means I cannot let you go, he said, his voice rough with sincerity. It means the thought of you leaving this villa, of you being anywhere but where I can see you, where I can touch you, is unacceptable. He lifted my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm. The touch was searing, a brand of possession that went deeper than any contract. It means the debt is forgiven. All of it. You are no longer an employee. You are here because I want you here, because I need you here. He was setting me free, only to bind me to him with infinitely stronger chains. Chains of desire, of connection, of a terrifying mutual need. It was the most seductive prison I could ever imagine. And what am I if I'm not your employee? I asked, my voice trembling. He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. You are mine, he said, and the words were not a threat, but a vow. And I am yours, if you will have me. The surrender in his voice, the vulnerability in his eyes, was my undoing. This powerful, dangerous man was offering me not just his body, but a piece of his guarded soul. I saw the truth then. This was not a game. This was not a manipulation. This was real. And it was as terrifying as it was beautiful. I rose on my toes and kissed him. It was my answer. It was my surrender. It was my choice. This time the kiss was different. It was slower, deeper, an exploration and a confirmation. It was a promise. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling. From now on, he murmured, this is your home. I am your home. And in that moment, surrounded by the silent, watchful books, in the heart of the lion's den, I believed him. The world remade itself in the days that followed. The library was no longer my office. It became our sanctuary. The villa was no longer my gilded cage. It became my domain. Valerio was no longer my captor or my employer. He became my lover, and in his own fiercely possessive way, my partner. He moved me from the guest suite into his own rooms, a sprawling complex of spaces that felt more like him, sparse, elegant, and dominated by a wall of windows that looked out over the bay. Our days fell into a new, intoxicating rhythm. I would still work, but the pressure was gone. The debt was erased. I worked now. I was fascinated because I was good at it, and it also provided a way to be close to him and understand the world he moved in. He would often pull up a chair beside me at the desk, reading over my shoulder, his arm draped casually around the back of my chair, his fingers playing with the ends of my hair. He valued my mind, he sought my opinion, and he listened to my analyses with a focus that was more flattering than any praise. In the evenings, we would have dinner on the terrace. The city lay out below us like a carpet of diamonds. He told me stories of his childhood, of a stern father who had taught him that emotion was a liability, of a mother who had filled this cold stone house with music and laughter until her untimely death. He spoke of the weight of his inheritance, not just of wealth, but of power and the constant grinding vigilance it required. I, in turn, told him about my life before, the safe, academic world I had inhabited, my mother's quiet strength, my father's fatal flaw of optimism. I told him about my Nonna, the one who had taught me the old Sicilian curses, a fiery woman who had defied her own family to marry for love. She would have liked you, I said one night, the stars sharp and bright above us. She appreciated men with spines. Valerio smiled, a real, unguarded smile that transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter. And what would she have thought of you being with a man like me? I looked at him, at the sharp, beautiful lines of his face in the candlelight, at the power that radiated from him even in repose. She would have told me to be careful, I said honestly, and then she would have told me to live my life without regret. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. I will spend my life ensuring you have none. The words were a vow, and I felt them settle deep in my soul. But this new life wasn't all softness and starlight. The reality of his world was a constant dark undertow. There were late-night phone calls that would pull him from our bed, his voice turning cold and hard as he issued commands in another room. There were times when Luca would arrive, his face grim, and they would disappear into his study for hours, emerging with a tension in their shoulders that spoke of violence dealt or ordered. I never asked for details. He never offered them. It was an unspoken agreement. He protected me from the worst of it, and I accepted the parts I needed to know. I was his advisor, not his confessor. One afternoon, about a month after I had moved into his rooms, I was in the library profiling a new contact from Bari. Something about the man's linguistic patterns felt off. He was too smooth, too consistent. In real human communication, there are always tiny inconsistencies, hesitations, the fingerprints of a thinking mind. This man's language was sterile, as if it had been rehearsed or generated. I was so engrossed, I didn't hear Valerio come in. I felt his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs kneading the tight muscles, and I leaned back into his touch with a sigh. "You're tense," he murmured, leaning down to kiss the top of my head. "This man from Bari," I said, gesturing to the screen. "He's a lie," Valerio stilled. "Explain." His language is too perfect. The sentence structures are mathematically balanced. The emotional valence is flat, regardless of the topic. He uses no regional dialect, no personal idioms. He's either a highly disciplined sociopath, which is possible, or, I turned to look at him, or he's a construct, a persona built for this specific interaction. I think he's a plant, probably from the DIA, the Direzione Investigativa Antimafia, Italy's elite anti-mafia police. Valerio's face went cold and smooth, the mask of the Don settling into place. He studied the profile on the screen, then looked at me, a new, fierce respect in his eyes. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without hearing his voice. But the linguistic evidence is compelling. He's a ghost." He pulled out his phone and typed a rapid, one-word message. "Abort." Then he crouched down beside my chair, taking my hands in his. His were warm, solid, real. "You just saved me from a very long, very unpleasant conversation with a government prosecutor," he said, his voice low and intense. "They were getting clever. They've never tried a linguist before." He brought my hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, his gaze holding mine. "You are my most valuable weapon, Alessia. My secret." The word weapon should have chilled me, but the way he said it, with such reverence and possession, it felt like a caress. I was not a tool to be used. I was a sword he trusted to guard his back. It was a dark honor, but an honor nonetheless. That night he showed me a different side of his gratitude. It was not in words, but in touch. He worshipped my body with a focused intensity that left me breathless and boneless, mapping every curve and hollow as if committing me to memory. He was a man who took what he wanted, but with me, he gave as much as he took, driving me to the edge of sanity and holding me there until I was sobbing his name, until the only world that existed was the one we made together in the dark. Afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets, the moon casting silver stripes across the bed, he spoke into the silence. "I have to go to Palermo tomorrow. There is a meeting, a gathering of the old families." His voice was casual, but I felt the tension in his body. This was significant. "How long will you be gone?" 3 days. No more." He turned onto his side, propping his head on his hand, his dark eyes serious. "You will be safe here. Luca and a dozen other men will be with you at all times. You will not leave the villa." It was an order, but it was wrapped in concern. "I understand." He traced the line of my jaw. "When I return, things will be different. This meeting, it is about the future. Our future." He didn't elaborate, but he didn't need to. He was solidifying his power, securing his position, and by extension mine. He was building a fortress for us, and he was going to Palermo to lay the final stones. The morning he left, he kissed me goodbye in the grand foyer, a hard, possessive kiss in front of Luca and the other men. It was a public declaration. 3 days, he whispered against my lips. "Wait for me." I watched the black SUVs disappear down the cypress-lined drive, a strange emptiness opening up inside me. The villa, which had felt so alive with his presence, was suddenly just a beautiful, empty shell. I was the queen of a silent castle, waiting for my king to return from war, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would wait for him forever. The first day without him was unnervingly quiet. The villa, usually a hive of subdued activity, felt like a tomb. I tried to work, pulling up files on the minor players in the Amalfi Coast operation, but my focus was shattered. The words on the screen blurred into meaningless shapes. My mind kept drifting back to the intensity in Valerio's eyes when he said, "When I return, things will be different." The promise in those words was both thrilling and terrifying. Different how? What did a man like him consider a future? A permanent place by his side as his consort? A life forever within these walls, my world shrinking to the dimensions of his empire? The part of me that was still Dr. Alessia Marino, the academic who valued her independence, recoiled at the thought. But the woman he had unearthed, the one who thrived on danger and craved his touch, found the idea dangerously seductive. On the second day, the silence began to grate. I took a book out to the garden, trying to lose myself in a novel, but the story felt pale and insubstantial compared to the one I was living. Luca was a constant, silent shadow, always within sight, but never intruding. His presence was a comfort and a reminder of the precariousness of my situation. I was safe, but I was also a prize, a vulnerability for the man who protected me. That evening my phone buzzed. It was my mother. The sound of her voice, so normal and concerned, was a jarring intrusion from a life that felt a million miles away. "Alessia, honey, how is the research going? You've been so quiet." "It's intense, Mama," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "I'm making a lot of progress. It's just very absorbing. Your father and I were thinking of coming down to Naples this weekend. We haven't seen you in weeks. We could stay in a hotel, take you to dinner." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. The thought of my sweet, naive parents anywhere near this villa, near this world, was unbearable. They could not see me here, surrounded by armed men, living in the home of a Mafia boss. They could not see the change in me, the new sharpness in my eyes, the way I had acclimated to a life of luxury and latent violence. "No," I said too quickly. I softened my tone. "I mean, not this weekend. I'm actually going to be in Rome for a few days. A last-minute research symposium. Very exclusive. I won't be back until next week." The lies came so easily now, each one another brick in the wall separating my two lives. "Oh," she said, the disappointment clear in her voice. "Well, another time then. We miss you." "I miss you too, Mama," I said, and that at least was the truth. A profound loneliness washed over me after I hung up. I was lying to everyone I loved. I had become a stranger to them, and the person I was becoming was someone I was only beginning to know. I was adrift between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. The third day dawned gray and oppressive, the sky a sheet of lead pressing down on the city. A storm was brewing out over the sea. The air in the villa was thick and heavy, matching my mood. Valerio was due back today. The anticipation was a physical ache. I found myself listening for the sound of tires on the gravel drive, my heart leaping at every creak of the old house. The hours dragged. I couldn't read. I couldn't work. I paced the library, my restlessness growing with each passing minute. Late in the afternoon, the storm broke. Rain lashed against the windows, and the sky was torn open by flashes of lightning, the subsequent thunder shaking the very foundations of the villa. It was in the middle of this chaos that Luca's phone buzzed. He listened, his face granite. He didn't speak, but his eyes met mine across the room, and the message in them was clear and chilling. Something was wrong. "What is it?" I asked, my voice tight. "The meeting in Palermo," he said, his voice a low rumble that competed with the thunder. There was an incident. An attempt. My blood ran cold. An attempt? On his life? Luca gave a curt nod. "He is alive. He is unharmed. But there was a betrayal. From within our own." The world tilted. The room felt suddenly airless. An attempt. A betrayal. The words echoed in the space between the thunderclaps. All the theoretical dangers of his world had just become devastatingly real. "Where is he?" "He is returning. He will be here within the hour. The next 60 minutes were the longest of my life." I stood at the window in the grand foyer, watching the storm rage, the rain obscuring the view of the drive. Every shadow, every movement of the trees in the wind made my heart stutter. The image of him, surrounded by traitors, facing death, was burned into my mind. Finally, through the sheets of rain, headlights cut through the gloom. Not one, but 3 SUVs moving fast up the drive. They skidded to a halt at the entrance. The doors flew open. Men jumped out, their postures tense, weapons visible beneath their coats. And then he emerged from the lead vehicle. Valerio. He was alive. He was unharmed. But he was transformed. The controlled, elegant man who had left 3 days ago was gone. In his place was a primal force of nature, his clothes soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes blazing with a cold, murderous fury that was more terrifying than any outburst of rage. He strode into the foyer, water dripping from his coat onto the marble floor. He ignored Luca, ignored the other men. His gaze, sharp as a shard of glass, found me instantly. He crossed the space in a few powerful strides, his presence sucking all the air from the room. He didn't speak. He grabbed my face in his hands, his grip almost painful, and he kissed me. It was nothing like the kisses we had shared before. This was not passion or tenderness. This was a branding, a desperate, furious reaffirmation of life. It was hard and possessive, a storm of relief and rage. I could taste the rain on his lips, the metallic tang of adrenaline, the dark promise of vengeance. When he finally broke the kiss, he rested his forehead against mine, his breathing ragged. "They tried to take me from you," he growled, his voice raw with a violence that shook me to my core. "They will learn what it means to touch what is mine." In that moment, any last shred of doubt or fear evaporated. The academic, the daughter, the good girl, they all fell away. I looked into the eyes of this dangerous, furious man, and I saw only my future. I placed my hand against his wet cheek. "Then we will teach them," I said, my voice steady, my own resolve hardening like diamond. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, and then a profound, dark satisfaction. He had not just come home to safety. He had come home to an ally. The storm of his return settled into a cold, focused calm. He shed his wet coat, and the fury that had radiated from him on arrival was now banked, contained into something far more dangerous, a meticulous, surgical intent. He led me not to the library or our bedroom, but to his war room, a place I had never been, a stark, modern space hidden behind a panel in his study. Here there were no books or frescoes. Monitors were showing live feeds from cameras I never knew existed, a large digital map of southern Italy with blinking lights, and a long polished table. This was the brain of his operation, the nerve center. Luca and 2 other senior captains, men with grim faces and cold eyes, followed us in. Valerio stood at the head of the table, his hands flat on the surface. "The traitor was Salvatore," he said, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "My cousin." The name meant nothing to me, but the reaction from the other men was a subtle tightening, a collective intake of breath. This was not just a betrayal, it was a sacrilege. He made a deal with the Lombardo family from Palermo. They provided the shooters. He provided the access. His reward was to be my territory north of Salerno. He looked at me, his gaze including me in the Council of War. His mistake was overestimating their competence and underestimating my paranoia. He tapped a key on the table, and a photograph appeared on the main screen. A man, handsome, with a familiar, arrogant tilt to his chin, the same dark, Rossi eyes. Salvatore. He is in the wind. He knows he has one chance. He will not surface again in Italy. Valerio's eyes were like chips of obsidian, but he has a weakness. A daughter. A 7-year-old girl is living with her mother in a private school in Switzerland. He believes they are hidden. He is wrong. A cold dread trickled down my spine. I knew where this was going. This was the world I had chosen. This was the price of the power, the protection, the passion. Valerio's gaze swept over his men. "We will find him through the child, but we will not touch the child. Is that understood?" The men nodded. The distinction was crucial. This was about sending a message, not about slaughtering innocents. It was a rule, a line his brand of brutality would not cross. Then his eyes settled on me. "Alessia, Salvatore is clever. He will be using cutouts and encrypted channels, but he will need to communicate. He will need to know his daughter is safe. Please find him. Listen to the wind. Find the anomaly in the patterns. He is a man under immense stress. He will make a mistake. I want you to find it." He was not asking the men to track him through brute force alone. He was asking me to hunt him with my mind. He was handing me the scent and trusting me to run with the hounds. It was the ultimate test of my loyalty, my skill, and my stomach for this life. I looked at the face of Salvatore Rossi on the screen. I saw the arrogance, the familial resemblance, the betrayal. I thought of the gunmen in Palermo, the bullets that had tried to tear Valerio from this world, from me. And I felt a cold, clear rage of my own. "Give me everything you have on him," I said, my voice steady. Every intercepted communication from the last year. His financial records, his known associates, his travel patterns. And I need a voice sample. A slow, approving smile touched Valerio's lips. It was the smile of a wolf. "You have it." For the next 48 hours, I lived in the war room. I slept in short, fitful bursts on a leather couch, ate meals brought to me, and immersed myself in the life of Salvatore Rossi. I learned his speech patterns, his favorite slang, the way he used humor to mask aggression, and the slight stutter he developed when lying under pressure. I built a psychological profile so detailed, I felt I could predict his every move. The key, as I had suspected, was the daughter. I found it in a series of seemingly innocuous comments he'd made to associates over the past 6 months. Mentions of a little bird and her song. Cross-referencing these with travel data, I pinpointed a private school near Lake Geneva. Then I turned to the real-time intercepts. The chatter was a chaotic mess of coded language and dead ends. But I was looking for something specific. Not a command or a threat, but a thread of paternal anxiety. And I found it, a fragment of a conversation, picked up from a tapped phone belonging to one of Salvatore's old drivers. The driver was talking to his own wife, complaining about a strange request. A man he didn't know had paid him to drive to a small town in the French Alps and leave a specific children's book, a French edition of Le Petit Prince, on a specific bench in a park at a specific time. It was a one-time drop, easy money. The driver thought it was a romantic gesture, a lover's secret. But I knew. Le Petit Prince, the story of a lonely prince caring for his single perfect rose. A message to a little girl, a signal. I ran to Valerio's study, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with the fierce thrill of the hunt. He was at his desk, reviewing weapons manifests. I didn't speak. I placed the transcript on his desk and circled the relevant lines. He read it. His expression did not change, but the air in the room shifted. He looked up at me, and the pride in his eyes was a physical warmth. "The park in Chamonix," he said softly. "He will be watching. He would not trust anyone else to confirm the drop was made." He stood, coming around the desk to stand before me. He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. "You are magnificent," he whispered, and then he kissed me, a seal of approval and a promise. 2 days later, the news came. French authorities had apprehended Salvatore Rossi in a cafe overlooking the park in Chamonix. He had been quietly extradited to Italy, into the waiting hands of Valerio's men. There was no news report, no official record. He had ceased to exist. That night, Valerio took me to the very edge of the cliffs behind the villa, where the land fell away to the churning sea far below. The storm had passed, and the sky was clear, littered with a billion stars. He stood behind me, his arms wrapped around me, his chin resting on my head. "It is done," he said, his voice quiet in the vast darkness. "The challenge has been met. The message has been sent." He turned me in his arms to face him. The moonlight carved his features in silver and shadow. "You stood with me. You did not flinch. You hunted one of my own blood, and you found him." He went down on one knee. The world stopped. There on the cliff's edge, with the ancient sea roaring below and the infinite sky above, Valerio Rossi, the most powerful man in southern Italy, looked up at me, his obsidian eyes reflecting the starlight. He took my hand. "Alessia Marino," he said, his voice strong and clear, carrying over the wind. "You are the strength I did not know I lacked. You are the mind that completes my own. You are the only woman who has ever looked at me and seen the man, not the monster." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was not a gaudy diamond, but a deep, blood-red ruby, square-cut and ancient, set in heavy, intricately worked gold. It looked like a crown. "This was my mother's," he said. "The women of my family have worn it for generations. They were all strong, but none, I think, as strong as you." He held the ring, his gaze locked with mine. "Marry me, rule with me, be my wife, be my queen." There were no more doubts, no more fears. The journey from the cafe to this cliff had been one of terror and transformation, and I had emerged on the other side, forged into something new, something harder, something that belonged utterly to this man and this world. I looked at the ring, at the man, at the future he was offering. A future of power, of passion, of a love that was as dangerous and profound as the sea below us. I did not hesitate. "See," I said, my voice steady, my heart full. "Yes." He slid the ring onto my finger. It was heavy. It was perfect. He rose and kissed me. And it was a seal, a vow, a beginning. We were no longer a man and his asset. We were a king and his queen. And together, we would build an empire that would echo through the ages. The ruby was a constant, heavy warmth on my finger, a tangible anchor to the new reality that had been born on the cliff's edge. It was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a sigil. The morning after the proposal, I walked into the library and found the atmosphere had shifted. Luca, who had always regarded me with a neutral, professional distance, now gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head. The butler, when he brought my coffee, addressed me as Signora Rossi for the first time. The change was subtle but absolute. I was no longer the guest, the consultant, the lover. I was the future. Valerio was different, too. The last vestiges of the wall he kept between his personal and professional lives crumbled. He began to include me in everything. Later that day, he laid out a series of architectural plans across the large library table. They were for a new state-of-the-art security and communications center to be built in a sub-level of the villa. "This will be your domain," he said, his finger tracing the outline of a soundproofed analysis room. "A dedicated team, the best technology money can buy. I want you to build it. Hire who you need. You will be the ear of this family, Alessia. Nothing will happen in Naples, in Campania, in all of southern Italy, that you will not hear whispered on the wind first." He was giving me an empire within his empire. Not just a role, but a fiefdom. My own power base, built on the unique skill that had brought me to him. It was a staggering gesture of trust, and a brilliant strategic move. My value was no longer just in my analysis. It was in the intelligence apparatus I would now command. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. I interviewed candidates from a pool vetted by Luca. Brilliant, amoral tech experts and data analysts who asked no questions and demanded exorbitant salaries. I approved equipment lists, designed workflow charts, and initiated the integration of my new department into Valerio's existing operations. It was exhilarating. I was using every bit of my organizational and intellectual prowess, but for a purpose my university mentors could never have imagined. One evening, as I was reviewing a list of potential surveillance targets, Valerio came to me with a small velvet box. "An engagement gift should be met with a wedding gift," he said, his eyes glinting. Inside the box was a pair of earrings, exquisite, pear-shaped diamonds, but set in a way that was slightly too thick, too technical. "They are beautiful," I said, lifting one out. "And they are more than that," he replied, taking it from me and gently fixing it to my ear. He did the same with the other. "They are linked to the new system you are building. A panic button. A twist of the right earring will send a distress signal and your exact GPS coordinates to me and to Luca. A twist of the left will activate a live microphone. You will never be out of my reach, and I will always be able to find you." He cupped my face, his thumb stroking the jewels now adorning my ears. "I almost lost you before I even had you. That will never happen again." The gift was a perfect symbol of our union. Breathtaking beauty intertwined with ruthless, practical necessity. It was not a symbol of distrust, but of a protection so absolute it bordered on obsession. I loved him for it. The planning for the wedding itself was a surreal exercise in duality. Sophia, Valerio's terrifyingly efficient assistant, took charge. To the outside world, it was to be the society wedding of the year. Dr. Alessia Marino, a promising academic, is marrying the reclusive, philanthropic billionaire Valerio Rossi, whose family has a long history of wealth in shipping and hospitality. The announcements were sent to glossy magazines. A famous designer from Milan arrived at the villa with sketches for my dress. We tasted cakes and selected flowers. It was all perfectly normal, wonderful. But beneath the surface, the machinery of our real world was grinding. The guest list was a who's who of the Italian underworld, carefully balanced with enough legitimate business associates, politicians, and celebrities to provide the perfect camouflage. I vetted every name. My new system was already yielding dividends as I cross-referenced financial records with intercepted communications, ensuring that no one harboring even a flicker of disloyalty would be within a mile of us on that day. Security plans were drawn up that resembled a military invasion more than a wedding. Sniper positions are established on surrounding rooftops, guest identities are confirmed through biometric scans, and a no-fly zone is enforced over the villa. I was no longer just the bride. I was a principal asset, a key strategic node in the organization, and my safety was paramount. My parents, of course, were overjoyed and utterly oblivious. My mother cried when I showed her the ring over a video call, the massive ruby explained away as a family heirloom. "He must love you so much, Alessia," she sniffed. "To give you his mother's ring." "He does, Mama," I said, and for the first time, the lie felt like only a partial lie. He did love me. He just loved me in a way she could never comprehend. The night before the wedding, Valerio took me to the cliff's edge again. We stood in silence for a long time, watching the lights of the city and the dark, endless expanse of the sea. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. I thought about it. Afraid of the man beside me? No. Afraid of the life I was choosing? The violence, the moral compromises, the constant vigilance? A little. But more than that, I was certain. "I'm only afraid of a world without you in it," I said, and it was the truest thing I had ever spoken. He turned to me, and in the starlight, I saw the raw, unvarnished truth in his own eyes. "Before you, I was a king in an empty castle. I had power, but I had nothing to protect, nothing that was truly mine. You have given me a reason for everything. You have given me a soul." He kissed me then, a slow, deep kiss that was a promise and a farewell to our old selves. "Tomorrow we will be married. Tomorrow we would be bound together, not just by love, but by blood and oath and the immense, terrifying power we would wield together." We walked back to the villa, hand in hand, the lights of our future blazing before us, ready to conquer the world. The wedding was a masterpiece of beautiful lies. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the private chapel on the villa's grounds, painting the ancient stone floor in kaleidoscopic colors. I wore a gown of ivory silk, deceptively simple, its value evident in the whisper-soft fabric and the flawless, invisible seams. The ruby on my finger glowed like a captive ember. My father, beaming with pride, his financial woes a forgotten nightmare, walked me down the aisle between rows of guests who represented two parallel ateliers, the public one of wealth and respectability, and the hidden one of absolute power. At the altar, Valerio waited. He looked more like a king than a groom, his posture rigid, his eyes, for once, not scanning for threats, but fixed solely on me. He saw only me. When my father placed my hand in his, the touch was electric, a current of understanding and possession that silenced the murmur of the congregation. We spoke our vows in clear, strong voices. It was a vow of protection, of loyalty, of a love that would burn through any enemy. Mine was a vow of the same, a promise to stand beside him, to be his shield as much as he was mine. When the priest pronounced us man and wife, and Valerio lifted my veil, the kiss he gave me was not one of chaste celebration. It was a seal, a brand. It was a message to every person in that chapel that I was his, and he was mine, and this union was unbreakable. The reception was a whirlwind of champagne and calculated socializing. I played my part perfectly. The blushing, intellectual bride, charming politicians, and dazzling celebrities with carefully curated anecdotes about my research. All the while, my mind was working, my new diamond earrings a comforting weight, my eyes subtly noting the micro-expressions of the men in the room who mattered, the ones whose loyalty was the bedrock of our power. I saw the respect in their eyes now, not just for the Don's woman, but for the woman who had found Salvatore. They knew. Later, under a canopy of stars and fairy lights, Valerio pulled me into a dance. The orchestra played a soft, romantic waltz, and for a few moments we were just a man and a woman, swaying to the music, lost in each other. "Are you happy, Mia Regina?" he murmured into my hair. My queen. I looked up at him, at this dangerous, beautiful man who had torn my life apart and rebuilt it into something so much more vibrant and terrifying. I thought of the power at my fingertips, the love that consumed me, the future we would forge in fire and blood. "I am complete," I whispered. And I was. The girl who had sat in the cafe, desperately trying to save her father, was gone. In her place was a woman who commanded respect, who wielded power, who loved a king, and was loved as his equal. We had just begun our first dance as husband and wife when Luca appeared at Valerio's shoulder, his face a mask of calm that did not reach his eyes. He whispered a single urgent phrase. Valerio's body went rigid for a fraction of a second, then relaxed, his hand tightening on my waist. He nodded at Luca, who melted back into the crowd. Valerio leaned down, his lips brushing my ear as if sharing a lover's secret. "The Lombardo family from Palermo," he whispered, the music covering his words. "They have made a move, a small one, testing our borders now that the wedding is done." He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. There was no fear in them, only a cold, anticipatory fire, the first challenge to our reign. I felt a similar fire ignite in my own blood. This was not a disruption. This was the beginning. I did not ask what the move was. I did not flinch. I smiled, a sharp, predatory smile that matched his own. "Then let us teach them their first lesson," I said softly, my hand resting on the ruby at my finger, the crown I now wore. He smiled back, a flash of white in the night, and spun me in a final graceful turn as the music swelled. The dance was over. The game was afoot, and together we turned from the glittering party to face the darkness, ready to meet it, prepared to conquer it, prepared to rule.